The Beatles revolutionized music and pop culture during the 1960s, but few know what became of the band members' children. George Harrison's only son Dhani has recently been in the news, confirming long-standing rumors about his father's unfinished musical legacy. Join Facts First as we explore the startling disclosures from George's son Dhani. Dhani's revelation: my dad was a Beatle. Growing up, Dhani Harrison was unaware of his father George's fame as the lead guitarist of the Beatles. As George's only child with second wife Olivia Arias, Dhani lived a sheltered early childhood, with his father keeping his illustrious musical past mostly private. According to Dhani's recollections, his earliest memories of George were of him happily gardening and landscaping the grounds of their home at Friar Park in Henley-on-Thames. To young Dhani, George seemed like nothing more than a laid-back hippie enthusiastically tending to his trees and flowers. Dhani spent the first 7 years of his life thinking his dad was simply a gardener, not realizing he had been 1/4 of the biggest rock band in history. This changed suddenly when Dhani was chased home from school by a group of kids singing the iconic Beatles track Yellow Submarine. Dhani was confused and distressed, unable to understand why the other children were taunting him with this bizarre Beatles serenade. When Dhani arrived home, he confronted George in shock, demanding to know why he'd never told him about his involvement with the Beatles. George casually responded that he probably should have mentioned his Beatles legacy earlier. Looking back, it seems George had intentionally sheltered his young son from the knowledge of his fame in order to provide some semblance of a normal childhood. Having grown up in the chaotic height of Beatlemania himself, George likely wanted to give Dhani the privacy and freedom he never had. Not burdening Dhani with his larger-than-life Beatles background allowed him to form his own identity separate from his father's colossal celebrity. Of course, as Dhani grew older, he became more and more aware of his father's musical origins and massive cultural influence. But he still retains fond memories of his early years when George was simply the bearded man covered in soil, ceaselessly tending the abundant gardens and greenhouses of Friar Park. Following in his father's footsteps. As Dhani became aware of his father George's true legacy, he gradually followed in the Beatles' footsteps by pursuing his own musical talents. Dhani's immersion in music started in earnest when George was recording his final album, Brainwashed, released posthumously in 2002. Though initially hesitant to participate, Dhani ended up learning hands-on music production skills while assisting his father to complete the record. When Brainwashed was re-released on his 20th anniversary in 2022, Dhani marked the occasion by publicly thanking the producers who mentored him during the difficult process of finishing his late father's work. Dhani movingly expressed how lost he would have felt without the guidance of Jeff Lynne, Mark Mann, and Ryan Ulyate. Their support enabled him to gain priceless first-hand experience even in the midst of his grief. Propelled by this background, Dhani went on to launch his own musical career, forming the bands The New Number 2 and Fistful of Mercy. Though he downplays any conscious effort to emulate his iconic father, Dhani's thoughtful songwriting and accomplished guitar skills undeniably echo George's influence. Reviews of Dhani's work invariably note the haunting resemblance to George's signature sound and style. But Dhani also brings his own flair and original perspective to the table. His 2017 solo album In Parallel, for instance, incorporates electronic synthesizers and rhythms atypical of his father's discography. And the environmentalist themes expressed in songs like All About Waiting point to Dhani's distinct voice as a socially conscious artist. When performing live, his visual similarity to a young George is often striking. Yet musically, he pays homage to his father's work without simply imitating it. Numbers like The New Number 2's choices transmute George's stylings into something updated and individual. Dhani may have become a musician because of his father, but he blazes his own trail rather than just covering the Beatles' territory. George's complex romances and family life. Before having son Dhani, George Harrison had been married once before to model Pattie Boyd from 1966 to 77. Their union ultimately dissolved due to George's infidelities and increasing spiritual differences. A year after divorcing Boyd, George became involved with Olivia Arias, an employee at A&M Records, which distributed his Dark Horse label. Olivia and George's romance quickly got serious, resulting in Dhani's birth in 1978. The couple wed 1 month later, and Olivia embraced the role of devoted wife and mother at George's Friar Park estate. When George passed away from cancer in 2001, he and Olivia had been married for 23 years, spending his final days together peacefully at home. In the decades since George's death, Olivia has been committed to protecting his musical legacy. She served as a producer for Martin Scorsese's 2011 documentary on George's life and oversaw the 2014 box set reissue of his solo catalog. But Olivia made headlines in 2022 when she suggested that George had left behind unfinished song scraps that she hoped to one day complete. Olivia mentioned that George's archive contained about 10 partial songs and melody ideas that were never fully fleshed out before his death. She speculated that she and son Dhani might collaborate to complete these fragments for some type of posthumous release. Olivia first voiced the idea around the 10-year anniversary of the Beatles' Love theatrical show in Las Vegas. Naturally, this proposition sparked massive interest among Beatles fans who would love the chance to hear final new music from George. At the same time, it raises concerns whether Harrison himself would have wanted these musical bits and pieces turned into complete songs without his involvement. Olivia believes George would approve, but some fans argue it's impossible to determine his wishes conclusively. The ethics of posthumous releases always ignites debates between fans and estates. On the one hand, releasing George's unfinished music allows the public to appreciate the full extent of his artistic output, but others contend that leaving the fragments as they are respects his intentions for the material. How the unfinished songs may eventually surface, if ever, remains to be seen. But Olivia seems intent on unearthing more of George's work, even recruiting Dhani's talents to showcase the totality of his timeless musical genius. Confirming the rumors of unfinished songs. Olivia's previous remarks seemed to gain credence when the couple's son Dhani appeared to confirm the rumors. In a 2022 interview, Dhani suggested that between 10 to 16 musical fragments exist in his father's archives that could potentially be developed into full songs. While he didn't outright verify the exact number, his statements lent validity to Olivia's prior implications. Understandably, Dhani's revelations dismayed some Beatles fans who had hoped the rumors of George's incomplete work were unfounded. His acknowledgement now makes it seem like these song fragments do exist, raising expectations that a posthumous release of some kind is forthcoming. However, skepticism persists about the ethics and motives of fashioning full tracks from partial blueprints not endorsed by the original artist. Now it's time to hear from you. Do you think they should release full songs based on George Harrison's leftover fragments, or is that unethical? Let us know in the comments section below.